Good people, I'm Dmitry. Welcome to this really exciting experimental video where we take a look at an enclosure from 10 years ago and see how it compares to things that we would consider to be like the standard in 2020. Now, the reason why this case is here are two things. Number one, I discovered the Cooler Master 692 through a Hardware Canucks review back in 2010. And number two, it actually was my very first enclosure into which I built my first gaming PC ever. So the feels, man, the feels. The Cooler Master 692 Advanced I would consider to be like the mid-tower for 2010 in terms of giving you plenty of airflow options, lots of storage potential, good hardware compatibility, overall excellent user experience for the time. But 10 years has passed and I want to explore what this decade has done for the case industry, which is why we have the new Corsair 4000D Airflow on the table. I would consider that to be like the standard mid-tower for 2020 that is affordable and checks off many of the boxes that we've so accustomed to today that users expect. Tempered glass, good airflow, not too massive, good optimizations for hardware, user experience, cable management, and of course, the looks. So in this video, let's discover some similarities to what you could find for the mid-tower in 2010, the Cooler Master 692 Advanced, to what we have now in 2020. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. This should be fun.
400, yeah. The Rival 3 wireless, nice. You get up to 400 hours of playtime with two AAA batteries at 1000 Hz. That's plenty of time to own in games with a good shape, user-defined weight, and a mouse that is also Bluetooth ready. The SteelSeries Rival 3 wireless. Check it out below.
Alright, so first of all, I'm actually quite happy that Cooler Master had this case to lend me for this feature video because it's really hard to find, it's no longer for sale, and I'm also quite excited to receive the white version because that is not very hard to find. My case back in 2010 was black, and that is actually one of the features which I loved because it was a black on black exterior to interior, and I think like aside from the Corsair 800D, Cooler Master with this sort of mainstream release really pushed the black interior forward. To this day, design-wise, I would say the Cooler Master 692 Advanced still checks off many boxes. We have that ventilation pattern in the front, nice little curves, mesh. The panel that I have here are completely solid, but of course, back in the day, you could get with transparent acrylic. I'm happy that trend died and we moved to tempered glass, but I hope that we can see a bit more experimentation with side panels because the solid side panel here looks actually quite nice. Of course, companies over the last decade have improved that whole color scheme for the white exterior. With the Cooler Master case here, you can see there's that big mismatch in the plastic versus steel white. That could be due to age, of course, but I'm happy that with cases like the 4000D Airflow in white, we have that perfect synchronization of the exterior white on different surfaces. One of the most interesting exterior differences between then and now is the I/O. So obviously we have our power reset button, we have the LED switch for the front fan, audio jacks, 4 USB ports, 2 of which are USB 3, and this most interesting little pocket at the top with its own lid that has a hot swappable SSD bay. That is also compatible with 3.5-inch drives, but they do stick out. It's one of those things that I would not mind having that today in 2020 in some cases. Obviously that brings up additional wiring that you have to do, but still, I mean, I have an external dock into which I plug in my hard drives whenever I need to access something from an archive. So this feature from 2010 makes total sense today. Some other minor exterior things to notice: thumb screws are now captive on most cases where they don't fall off the side panel, where back in 2010 you had to keep track. I'm really happy that the water cooling cutouts above the rear fan are gone in 2020 because that gives you additional space for the fan to move up and down in case you need some extra clearance. And plus, nobody is using external water cooling in 2020, especially when it comes to like budget under $100 cases. I'm really happy that over the last decade we've seen optimizations of the interior layout, therefore shrinking the standard mid-tower size. When we compare the storage potential of the 2010 enclosure, obviously everyone was still on 3.5-inch drives. SSDs were not as abundant as they are now, but with the removal of that whole array from the front, you can shrink the enclosure while still allowing for massive GPU support. Another obvious structural change over the years have been the removal of the 5.25-inch drive bay. I totally get it. I have not touched an optical drive in years, but even to this day, whenever we publish a mid-tower or a full tower review, people are like, excuse me, there's room for an optical bay. Why don't case manufacturers build that in? And it's a valid concern, obviously, but just the fact that they have been completely removed from the case industry, I mean, that is probably a telling sign that not many people use them. And it's actually kind of funny to see how many optical bays were included on standard mid-towers back in the day. Like you have 4 with the 692 Advanced, which is a bit overkill. Like you might have an optical bay in one, maybe a card reader in the second slot. And I guess they were trying to, you know, make sure to cover all their bases of more is better. And the same can be said for all those 3.5-inch drive caddies. Also notice the lack of 2.5-inch drive compatibility on these caddies, and actually on the entire case as well. There's no native SSD support. Some may say that having only 2 3.5-inch drive caddies on the 4000D Airflow may be a limitation for 2020, but also external storage is becoming a lot more popular because of this. Looking at the included fans on the Cooler Master case, I am so happy that Molex is dead. So goodbye ketchup and mustard cables and colored front I/O cables that made everything extra ugly. Plus motherboards have enough fan connectors in 2020 to not need Molex adapters for power. But in terms of fan quality, in today's cases versus back then, I feel like for that $100 price point and below, they're not significantly better. Speaking of airflow, it is probably the most important improvement over the last decade, not just in quality of the airflow, but also accessibility of it too. To access the front fan on the Cooler Master case, for example, you have to remove the drive cage, which is not easy to do. It screws at the bottom and at the back as well. While accessing the top fans is pretty straightforward with the removal of that top panel, and even though the mounting holes are slightly offset away from the center, today everything is moved as close as possible to the side panel, to your glass panel, away from the motherboard area to give you better compatibility. Radiator clearance has evolved to fit 240, 280, and 360 in most mid-towers today, while the 692 could only accommodate a 240 or 280mm rad up top without the flexible strips for mounting. One really interesting foreshadowing element in case design comes through a vertical PCI slot. So on the Cooler Master enclosure, we have one, and back in the day, I used it for fan controller, so it's a single PCI slot with a little knob into which you connect a fan and you have full control of that fan speed. But obviously now all cases have 2 PCI slots basically in exactly the same location, so it is right up against the glass. It's kind of funny how we are given this extra feature in the case, but it's not well thought out in most cases because the GPU is right up against the glass. One of the case elements I appreciate the most in 2020 would be a power supply shroud. And you kind of take things for granted until you realize what you were dealing with before. On the Cooler Master enclosure, obviously the power supply is exposed. All the cables are visible, therefore doing a clean cable job. I mean, the case side panel is solid anyway, so there's no incentive to be very clean on the interior, but I'm happy that we moved into a direction where at least the case is working with you and trying to make sure that your system is as clean as possible by default. I'm really happy that all dust filters are now easily removable in 2020, unlike what we experienced in 2010, where it was kind of like an afterthought. You appreciated that at least there was some dust barrier, but my gosh, when it came to cleaning it and removing it, it was not easy, especially with the dust filter that was underneath the power supply, because it wasn't like it is removable now from the bottom of the frame. It was actually right beneath the power supply above the frame. Kind of stupid. Now, to my surprise, the user experience of actually building the computer in the case isn't that different from 2010 to 2020. Some differences might include like power supply routing at the bottom and like not spending that much time hiding all your cables and having a bit more room behind the motherboard tray for thicker cables, whereas on the Cooler Master enclosure you still have some room but not as much as what we've come to expect. Obviously cases now are made to showcase your hardware, not just house it properly. With the Cooler Master enclosure, we'll forgive the solid side panel, while the transparent acrylic window for the 692 was made to showcase your CPU cooler, a little bit of your GPU, and hide everything that is in the front, like your hard drives and your optical drives. In terms of airflow and cooling performance, I mean, it's been 10 years and over time we've been removing all the case airflow restrictions, and that shows here with the 4000D airflow temperatures versus the 692 advanced temperatures. But I am surprised that Cooler Master held its ground. Even though it's slightly warmer, it's not this glass box of heat that we experienced in 2018. For the launch price of $99 back in 2010, which was a really good deal, that money can get you the versatile P500A from Fantex, the new Lian Li Landcool 2 Mesh, the Be Quiet 500DX, so basically lots of cool options. Of course, it has been 10 years since. As with every product category, everything is cyclical, so like certain features are popular today, but others will come and take over until you get back to the original thing that made this whole thing happen. And I feel like the Cooler Master 692 Advanced is timeless. I would love to see this get refined to like a 2020 design in terms of what we want for airflow, user experience, the use of assembly and all that. And I feel like with Cooler Master, especially after seeing the NR200 enclosure, this ITX master box that is amazing, perhaps they should consider doing another 690 release. But let me know what you think of this enclosure and this little recap on what we saw back in 2010 versus what I would say would be like a really good standard for 2020 with the 4000D airflow. Also, on the topic of like building the first computer ever, what was your case and what was your experience? And if you were to find it now, do you think that you would enjoy building in it? Or do you think it would be like, nope, there's something better available that I will 100% navigate towards? I'm Dmitry, thanks so much for watching. Check out this other relevant content, subscribe for more. I'll talk to you in the next video.